I want to bring in my man, though. I am joined with Shobhan Saxena. How you doing, man? You doing okay this morning? Shobhan, I cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay.
How you doing? You doing okay this morning?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you, Jamal? Good to be
I'm doing.
on your show again.
Well, thank you, man. I'm glad to have you. I'm Shobhan Saxena. He's Indian journalist based out of Sao Paulo, Brazil. In a career spanning more than 30 years, he has reported for the Times of India, the Hindu, the Indian Express, and various other publications in India. Right now, he's an international correspondent for DD India, the international channel of India's public broadcaster. And I would imagine having some damn good food while you are there doing that job. I'm glad that you could join me, man. The reason I asked you on is because of the emergency BRICS summit that took place. Lula, I believe this was last week during the SEO summit and during the Victory Day celebrations in China, in Beijing, called for an emergency summit. And his main and primary reason is we are being attacked. Like Trump is going after us with 50% tariffs for us prosecuting Bolsonaro. You have India that is getting hit with 50% tariffs. He's backed off of Russia for the time being, but Russia already has like 20,000 sanctions already applied against it. He's backed off of China because, in the words of Carl Jha, China has them by the balls. But for all intents and purposes, even South Africa. Give me the results of this first, because I want to step into this before I get further into this. I mean, obviously, they talked about closer integration and those type of things, but were there any tangible results from this meeting that took place yesterday?
I think, Jamal, more than anything else, this meeting was a show of solidarity between the BRICS countries and developing countries. You can't expect some tangible results or some signing of some agreement on a virtual meeting. And the BRICS meeting was held recently in July in Brazil, in which Prime Minister Modi had participated, and President Putin and President Xi Jinping could not participate in that meeting. So I think this meeting was kind of a continuation of the process. So they joined this meeting, and that BRICS summit happened before the tariff war was kind of launched against Brazil, against India, and against other countries. So I think this was an expression of solidarity that all these countries, they stand on a common ground. They want fair trade, and they want more multilateralism and not unilateralism. So that message has been given after this meeting. How that message will be received in Washington, D.C. is anybody's guess, because Peter Navarro has already used very, very strong language, calling the BRICS countries the vampires of BRICS. So we know what's going to happen. But I think it's important for BRICS countries individually and collectively to stand their ground. And I've been reading the statements coming out of the meeting, what President Lula said, what India's Foreign Minister Dr. Jaishankar said, what President Xi Jinping said, that all the BRICS countries, they stand for fair trade and cooperation and multilateralism, and not less transaction, not trade barriers. Because this is a very interesting phenomenon what we are witnessing in international global economic order. The Western countries are less and less in favor of global engagement or global economic order. Their approach is now more unilateral, especially the US, but the developing world and the emerging world, they want more globalization. They want the economic cooperation at the global stage to continue, because as growing economies, they want more trade, better supply chains, and more growth for the people. But that is not the case with the US or even European countries anymore. So overall, I think it was a good meeting. A message has been given, and it shows that the BRICS countries have a lot of commonality. They may not agree on everything, but as far as the trade barriers are concerned, they agree on a lot of things. And let's see how what kind of reaction comes from Washington. I don't think it will be very positive.
Speaking of that reaction, I will show you some of the reaction that is coming out of Washington right now. It is rather deranged and hyperbolic, but I don't think you would have expected anything else. This is
to the United
Peter Navarro.
The bottom line is none of these countries can survive if they don't sell to the United States. And when they sell to the United States their exports, they're like vampires sucking our blood dry with their unfair trade practices. So, look, let's see what happens, but I don't see how the BRIC alliance stays together, since historically they all hate each other and kill each other. The bottom line is,
wow. Wow. So you guys are vampires sucking the blood of America. You all hate each other and kill each other constantly.
Yeah.
And this is going to be over. That is hysterical. I mean, like, that is hysterics, like in full-blown hysterics, which makes me think that, you know, he is clearly concerned. Nobody acts that way and says that without being that shrill, without necessarily being concerned by what he's effectively saying. He's saying a withdrawal from America. That's what he's saying. And I don't think he's handling it all that well. And so you get this bravado of, oh, they need us. We're indispensable. They'll come back. India will come begging us to come back. Scott Benson said that nonsense the other day. Give me a take on that. You guys are all bloodsuckers, sucking the blood of America. Are you killing each other? So BRICS is going to just fall apart. It looks like BRICS is expanding.
Yeah. Besides the language, I think I have basically two problems with what Peter Navarro is saying there. First of all, he says these countries cannot survive without the US. I mean, that's not true. I mean, also in a globalized economy, I mean, the US cannot also survive without doing trade and business with some of the biggest economies in the world. I mean, for God's sake, I mean, US has about $750 billion of trade with China, $140 billion with India. Same with Brazil. And with Brazil, I think they have a trade surplus of more than $40 billion. So that's a bizarre, why would you impose sanctions or tariffs on a country with which you have a trade surplus? So it's in a global economy, no one can survive without the other. So if you take the collective trade that US does with BRICS countries, it will be into more than $1 trillion. So can the US survive without the BRICS countries? That is the question. Let's go back to 2008 when the world was hit by the global financial crisis and the American banks and corporations were, just going down the drain one after another. Who saved the global economy? It was the BRICS countries. Yeah. India, China, Brazil, and the economies of these countries were least affected. And they were not affected because they had solid banking system, rules and regulations, unlike US, where all the rules and regulations have been given away in favor of big corporations, and banking system was very fragile and it was going down, and the global economy was saved by the BRICS countries. At that time, the BRIC was just BRIC, 4 countries, not very big organization, but these emerging countries showed their power to say that, these countries cannot exist and will collapse without US is grossly mistaken. That is the first problem with Mr. Navarro's statement. The second problem, what he said, these countries hate each other and they want to fight each other. That's again ridiculous. I mean, the good thing about the BRICS countries is the leaders of these countries, they meet at least twice a year with each other. That never happened before in the history of emerging countries. When there was a non-aligned movement, they used to meet sometime, but to the BRICS, they have a summit every year, the leaders meet, and they also meet at G20, and they also meet at UN when the UN session is open, whether the foreign ministers or the prime ministers, presidents, they have a meeting. So to say of course, the countries have bilateral problems. They can have even problem of trade surplus or some border conflict, of uncertainty like India and China have. But to say they hate each other and they cannot work together, it is not really true. And we have enough evidence that how these leaders have been meeting. They recently met in China at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting, and everybody saw the visuals from there. Prime Minister Modi with President Xi and Putin discussing important matters, bilateral meeting, multilateral meetings, global governance initiative launched by China. So a lot of things are happening in the world, good things are happening in the world. And I think Americans are refusing to see writing on the wall. That's a problem. and this attitude, the unilateral attitude, not believing in multilateralism, creating trade barriers, putting sanctions, mixing non-trade issues with trade issues. That's a big thing. Like in case it happening in Brazil, the tariffs have been put not because of trade issues. Also against India, the tariffs have been increased to 50%, not because there's a problem between India and US trade, because they say you're buying oil from Russia. I mean, that is not a trade issue between India and Brazil. That's not just, sorry, India and US. And if there are any trade and tariff issues between India and US or any country, it should be taken to WTO. It should be resolved there. WTO was created with the sole purpose of resolving, providing a platform to the economies of the world to resolve their issues, to do trade in a balanced and fair manner. So, if you have any problem with India, take India to WTO, but they know that the any case against India will not stand there, or for matter any other country, Brazil or China, any other country. So that's why they're doing this taking unilateral measures, very strong actions, and it certainly is not going for good for global economy, and I'm sure it's also not good for U.S. economy in the long term. We're already seeing the results: the growing inflation, the jobs figures not really good coming from the U.S. So I think U.S. can face difficulties. Of course, everyone is going to suffer when there's a disruption in global economy. Everyone is going to suffer, no doubt about it. But other countries, they realize it now, and they're trying to find a way out. But the U.S., I'm not sure. They're going down this path, and they're not showing any indication that they want to change course. They want to continue going down this path of, confrontation or unilateral action or disruption in global economy.
Yeah, we don't work that way. That's just not the way the U.S. political system works. It's a hubris. It's a hegemon. And they've internalized that notion of being a hegemon. And so after declaring a trade war against the world, after going after individual countries, trying to pluck them off for one another, well, it's kind of hard to reverse course. I mean, if you remember when Donald Trump started the trade war against China, and the only thing that stopped him, the stock market was dropping 1,000 points every day. It was when the bond market got to the point where the U.S. currency itself started to become in question, where they finally pull back the reins. What they will lack in regards to economic output, they would just make up for with lies. So Trump will come out and say, we have the best economy on the planet, even if the job market tanks. He will try to get his particular guy in to cook the numbers, meaning reality is not going to be the thing that stops the Trump administration and their behavior on this. They think that they can effectively force their will. Also, it is a trade issue from the United States point of view. I know that Donald Trump is talking about Bolsonaro, or he's talking about India trading with Russian oil. That may be true in part, but Donald Trump has also pointed out that his issue is BRICS, and this idea that the dollar would lose, let's say, status and currency in the world as a reserve currency. I mean, you can look at it, you can see it falling. I mean, we had 70% at one point. We're down to 50-something% in regards to the reserve currency. And the more integrated BRICS gets and starts using their own currency, the less used the dollar will be. Trump, of all the political figures, seem to be very clear about that. It seems to be going at these countries as a direct result. Give me your take on that. I mean, do you see it in those terms? Does BRICS see it in those terms, that the U.S. is going directly after BRICS, not just individual states?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the history of global economy in the 50s and 60s and 70s, till 80s, even 90s, the US was the biggest economy in the world, but also the dominant economy in the world. Okay, it was the biggest economy. Number 2 was Japan, but there was a big gap between US and Japan, and the Germany and Britain and France. But there was a big gap always a big gap in terms of GDP. That is not the story anymore. US is still the biggest economy, but not the dominant economy. The American domination has been challenged by China. Right. The US is $30 trillion, China's $20 trillion, just $10 trillion behind. But in terms of economic impact, in terms of manufacturing, export and import, China is now, you can say, the dominant player in global economy. So that is the concern in Washington, because once it comes closer to US or passes US as the biggest economy, there's a fear that China may launch its own international reserve currency or digital currency or something. I think so. The whole effort here is they're trying to protect the dollar as an international reserve currency,
Yes.
and it may just backfire, because the effort to block the process of dis-dollarization may actually accelerate the process for a couple of reasons. For a number of reasons, principally what happened with the Russian reserves, they were stolen in broad daylight, and that caused a lot of concerns around the world. You put your international reserve, foreign exchange in Bank of England or Bank of France or American Bank, and suddenly it's gone. So it's not safe anymore. So it's not safe to put your reserves in euro or dollar. That is a big blow. That is a very, very big mistake. And all the countries, countries like India have a foreign exchange reserve of almost $700 billion. Brazil has about $600 billion. It's a huge amount of money. And of course, you would like to protect it. So that is one reason. Second reason, I think, is more pragmatic, Jamal. I mean, the countries spend a lot of their resources in doing business with each other with dollar. So I think it makes sense for them to try to explore the possibility of not just to give up dollar, but trying to do trade in their own currencies. Not 100%, but some amount of it. It has already happened between Brazil and China, I think more than 20, 30%. Between China and Russia, it's this huge percent. But it's not out of choice. I mean, in case of China, it's not out of choice. They were forced to do it because you have blocked all the ways for Russia to do business with other countries. What is the option? So many sanctions. They can't use SWIFT. They can't use international banking system. So Russia had to resort to doing business. For example, with India also, is a national currencies. And I think President Lula has spoken about it a lot of times, that world needs another international reserve currencies. And they are, there's a euro, there's a yen, there are other international currencies. I mean, the biggest challenge to US dollar has come not from BRICS countries. Historically, it has come from Europe. By creating euro, I think, and they gave up dollar for using trade between themselves. It became the reserve currency, international currency of the European Union. But I think the other players, emerging players, would also like to explore the possibility. I don't know if it's going to happen or not, but definitely explore the possibility. And as you said, the share of dollar in international trade has been going down over decades. From at one point in time it was 75%. Now it's down to, I think, 50%, something like 50%.
Yeah.
And it may go down further, and it is bound to happen. And many countries in the world, members of BRICS or not, they're exploring the possibility of doing trade between themselves without dollar. For example, two African countries, whatever, Kenya and Rwanda, Kenya and Uganda or whatever, they have to spend a lot of resources to do a trade between themselves in dollar. I mean, maybe African countries would like to explore the possibility of creating their own currency. Why not? Because you spend a lot of your own resources in procuring dollars and then sending it to the country. So this is bound to happen. But I think, this fair in America, because we have discussed this before. American economy has some very serious crisis.
Mm-hmm.
The foundations of U.S. economy are not very solid. Everybody knows it. The kind of debt they have, $38 trillion, can never be repaid. It can never be paid. And I think all this, Trump keeps talking about a lot of money coming into U.S. and they'll use this money to repay the debt. I think it's a bit of a fantasy.
It is.
That debt cannot be paid. And so this kind of a convoluted effort to save the dollar may actually accelerate the process of the world going away from dollar and exploring other possibilities.
Yeah, I mean, the moment that you use it as a weapon, it's a rational act to try to get away from the fact that you're using it as a weapon, right? I mean, like, what did they think? Like, they decided to use this thing that gave America this massive benefit and bonus, this advantage over every other country. And their response is, hey, let's use that as a weapon and target other countries with this particular thing that gives us a massive advantage. What did they expect the other countries to do? Just sit there and allow the United States to use it as a weapon? Or is it a rational act? It would be like if you, the moment that you build a nuke, I need to build a nuke, right? The moment that you build some kind of weapon, I need to find a way to counter that weapon. Well, the dollar,
Yeah.
if it's used as a weapon, it's the exact same thing. And these lunatics, for whatever particular reason, hubris, incompetence, this idea of their own moral, ethical superiority, assume, well, they're not going to do anything about it. If you remember, it was Joe Biden who turned to the leaders and said, what are you going to do, work together? And it was like, hey, that's a good idea. They start working together.
Yeah.
Is there anything offensive? And I don't mean kinetic, I just mean in an economic sense. Because I get the sense that what Lula wanted was a more muscular response to these tariffs that Trump is effectively applying. Was there anything like that that was, I mean, it's one thing to say we should integrate more. It's another thing to say we should take punitive action. And BRICS, with the scale of their economies, especially all combined, you would think has the capability of applying some level of punitive action and leverage against the US to make it painful. For example, China. You have all of these farmers that are out there praying for God to help them because Trump and the trade war has effectively damaged their capability of maintaining their livelihoods. Okay, that's a consequence, that's a cost that was being applied to the US in a way that the Trump administration maybe could compensate, but at the very least, those farmers are very pissed off at Donald Trump as a direct result of that. I'm saying, I get the sense that Lula wanted something a little bit more offensive, not integration, but what can we do to make this hurt for the US going forward? Did you get any sense of any of that? I mean, I know a lot of this meeting took place in private, but I'm still curious on if any of that leaked out.
I think it's an ongoing process, and that will continue. This dialogue between the BRICS countries. So one big problem, Jamal, is there's no consistency in U.S. policy. When they started with tariffs against Brazil, it was 10%, then became 25%, and suddenly overnight it became 50%, and for political reasons. And same thing happened with India. They started on a 25%, and it was hiked to 50%. Again, for matters not related to trade. So I think there's a lot of inconsistency. The messaging from Washington, they're playing good cop, bad cop, and trying to threaten countries. And so I think the country is also taking time in absorbing the messages, trying to understand what exactly do they want. For example, we know that at one point the tariffs against China had been increased to 145%, and suddenly they scaled it back to 50%, and now there's a freeze of 90 days freeze. So I think that there are a lot of games. It's kind of a game of nerves going on between countries. Of course, there are also discussions happening behind the doors, but what they say in public or what they post on social media is not really helping the cause, because this kind of pressure publicly on the countries. I think very few governments will take it lying down. I think they will um, retaliate or do something, and I think this meeting between the BRICS countries is an indication that the countries are thinking about forming a joint front and having solidarity among themselves, not only in terms of retaliation, but I think what the countries are doing now, they are exploring new markets, other markets. Now, for example, I think we just got the figures from about Brazilian trade recently, and the Brazilian exports have increased. They've gone down with the US, but the Brazilian exports to other countries have increased. I think that India is doing the same. India is also exploring new markets. India has recently signed free trade agreements with various countries, including Indonesia, Maldives, European Union, a discussion is going on. So I think the retaliation will be in a different form because the world is a very big place. We're almost 8 billion people. The US population is less than 5%. If you include European population and US population, it's not even 10% of the world population. So we're talking about 90% of the world. If you want to do trade, of course, the reason countries do trade with the US or European Union because they have a strong currency. That is the attraction. Sell something to US, you get money in dollar. It has. But if you scale up your quantity, for example, and you can sell to all over the world. But I think slowly and slowly there's a realization around the world that US is not um, a good trading partner because if you get threats from a trading partner, sanctions, tariffs, how can you do trade with that country? You would definitely think twice about it. You would definitely explore other markets. And for example, India and China. China has a huge trade surplus with India, huge, almost $70-80 billion. If China opens its market for Indian products, that will help Indian economy a lot. And I think this issue was also discussed, how these BRICS countries can reduce the trade surplus among themselves. That will help the balance out the global economy in a better way. So I think this discussion will continue. The presidency of the BRICS is with Brazil till December. Then it will be with India and then with China. So I think the discussion among the BRICS countries will continue and the countries will act individually, but also collectively to protect their common interests. There's a big chance of that.
Yeah, that's fair. That makes sense. Whether you're acting offensively in regards to some kind of retaliatory sanctions or tariffs, or whether you just react in a way that says, okay, well, let's just stop using the dollar. Let's change our markets. Let's let America try to figure out how to get beef somewhere else. Let's American farmers sell their soy or whatever else somewhere else. If you have 1.4 billion people or 1.5 billion people, and you are selling, your farmers were selling to that country, and then all of a sudden they no longer sell to that country, that is a hell of a market to try to replace. Where do you find 1.4 billion people to sell those things from to? And so you can see why those farmers are effectively taking a hit in the way that they're taking a hit. And if the rest of the world start doing that, that's rough. Carl Jha often likes to say that Donald Trump is his president. He lives in Bali. He's like, that's my president. And he says it in this kind of backhanded way because he's talking about this kind of accelerant that Donald Trump seems to be for pushing these countries together, countries that under normal circumstances may not have come together. Brazil is on the other side of the world. South Africa is on the other side of the world from Russia and China, and yet they've come together this kind of trade bloc. They did that as a direct result of U.S. behavior, not just with Trump. Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah. I hope they come up with a way to impart some kind of cost on the U.S. for doing this. Why? Give me your take on why did I'm saying this poorly. Why didn't the rest of the world come together in this way? Why didn't they say, we're not going to tolerate the U.S. behave in this way? Because the moment we tolerate them behave in this way, it's just going to create worse behavior. And let's lump together and function as a unit. They didn't really do that. BRICS is trying to do that now, but the rest of the world didn't particularly do that.
Yeah, Jamal, these systems have been created over decades. This globalization hasn't happened over a year or two. It started for example, reforms in India happened in early 90s, China also in 80s, and then these countries became part of globalization, globalized economy, Brazil also. Right. So we're talking about a period of 30, 40 years. And if you want to undo the system all of a sudden, it's just not possible. I think the global economy will just collapse. So I think that's the reason, countries have been cautious in retaliating against the US. And all these countries, barring China, China retaliated in a strong manner because China has a big economy. Okay. Yeah. And they can do it. And when they did it, the US backed off immediately. I think that's the importance of meetings, showing a collective face to the US, the BRICS countries. Okay, no, we are together. We want fair trade. We don't want trade barriers. We want more growth and development. But I don't think the message has been taken well or in a positive light in Washington. But this what we are witnessing right now is a disruption in the global economic order, and with the sole purpose of the US wants other countries to make more investment in the US, send their factories to the US. That is the purpose. But I think I heard Professor Richard Wolff on one of the programs, I don't remember where, and he makes a very interesting point. If other countries start doing business with each other, not with US, it will cause deflation around the world and inflation in the US. So it will be counterproductive for the US, because if you have an inflation and deflation in other places, US is thinking of making products in America and selling it to other countries. But when the countries have deflation, they're not going to buy from the US. So it will all backfire. As simple as that. So
yeah.
But
he was on the show. He said the same thing. He was making this point of saying, like, if you are going to take the entire reason that you ship, let's say, a factory to China, is because you can make it for cheaper. And if you were doing this in the United States, where you're going to have to pay higher wages, different costs, and everything else, well, they can't buy that from the US. Like, they couldn't afford to buy it anyway. It becomes a moot point in doing so. Only other people who can buy it are Americans. You can't sell that product anywhere else around the globe. No, yeah, Richard Wolff is really good with this. Wow. Shobhan, no, please.
No, just I think the American government has to realize there's not such a great demand for American products around the world. For example, if you want to sell American cars, nobody's looking forward to buying American cars anywhere in the world. Because they are gas guzzlers. They consume a lot of gasoline, and now we have better cars, more advanced cars, technologically more advanced cars coming from other countries. So if you think you can make American cars in US and ship it to Japan or Korea or China or India or Brazil, it's not going to happen. America went through a process of type of disindustrialization. They sent manufacturing abroad, and that process was again a long process, started in 1970s up to now. And suddenly you want to go back, you want to turn the clock back. It's not going to happen. It's not that easy. It can happen in fantasy land, but in the real world, it's very, very difficult.
What about Lula had been talking very strongly, and he's been saying this for the last several months, about a currency, a BRICS currency. At one point, Putin was pushing this very hard. Any movement on that, or was that just kind of pushed to the side?
Yeah, because if you talk of creating a new currency, there has to be discussion and debate for a long time. I mean, if you think of euro, how many years, decades took them to create a currency? And European countries are more homogeneous. They have a similar population, not so much difference in the economy. Of course, they have three big economies, but I mean, here we're talking about, for example, China's $20 trillion economy, and Iran is how much? I mean, not even probably $1 trillion economy. So, Brazil is 2 trillion, India is 4 trillion. So there's a big gaps here. To create a common currency, I think they're not talking about common currency. There's a more focus on a currency for doing business among themselves. That is the purpose. That is the thing, but that effectively means giving up on dollar, at least for doing business with among themselves. That is the idea. And as the size of BRICS grows, I mean, it was just 4 countries, then became 5, now it's 11, and there are several countries who are like associate members. So you're talking about 25, 30 countries. So if 25, 30 countries use a different kind of mechanism than dollar, is going to be a huge setback to dollar. But I think this is still at the discussion level. It's an aspiration. It's not something concrete, or there's a proposal to do that, because I think a lot of technicalities involved here, not for any other reason. A lot of technicalities involved, and I think as the discussion goes forward over the years, I think maybe they'll find some solution. And the countries are keen. Countries are already doing business in their national currencies for
Yes.
whatever reasons. It's already happening. It's not just an aspiration. Let's see how it evolves over the years. And there's a possibility.
Yeah, it may take care of itself. I mean, they may just find a mechanism for doing. You may not
Yeah.
need a common currency in essence. You may just,
Yeah.
I trade in yuan, I trade in, what is the name of the currency? It'll come to me in a moment. Rubles. Basically each country is trading their own currency, and it becomes so normalized that that's just it becomes this kind of formalized process over the course of time, just because of the way that they operate with
Yeah.
it. No, it makes
Yeah.
sense. That totally makes sense. Well, I think what the U.S. is doing is outrageous. I think these countries have every right to respond to it. I think it will backfire, especially with the political integration associated with all of these countries. I mean, for God's sake, when Modi was holding Putin's hand and they walked over to Xi Jinping, sending a message, right? I'm curious, what do you think that message was? And who do you think the message? Well, obviously it was aimed at the U.S. But what do you think the message ultimately was? We don't need you. We don't, you're not indispensable. We have other partners in the world. What do you think Modi was trying to get across in that?
See, I don't know if they were trying to give a deliberate message, but I'm more interested in how the message was received in Washington. And Donald Trump, he tweeted about it, that we have lost Russia, and that's what he said. I'm paraphrasing. We have lost India and China to the deepest, darkest China. India and Russia to China. Okay, so that's how it was. It was seen in Washington. That the countries there, they're conspiring against the U.S. This. I don't know what is the foundation of this fear. Countries have reasons to, and they need to build their own alliances based on the common interest.
Right.
As simple as that. I mean, there would be no BRICS, there would be no SCO if the international order was more balanced, more fair. It is not. They're saying IMF and World Bank and UN. We know how they work. They don't work in favor of emerging countries. So the emerging countries, they needed to make their own platform. There's a reason behind that. So I think countries have they have the right and a reason to make their own collective, their own alliances, to protect their own national interests. As simple as that. And I think that that is too much for Washington to digest, because it has been a hegemon for such a long time. They want every country to work for American interest. I'm afraid that's too much for other countries. Any country to accept that is too much.
Before I close with you, can we hit Venezuela just for 1 second? I am very curious about the relationship between Venezuela and Brazil. I can't imagine that any country in that region is going to be okay with the United States attacking Venezuela. Hegseth, the god of war, alcoholic television personality, just showed up in Puerto Rico, and because they have used Puerto Rico almost as a forward base for whatever kind of threats or machinations that they are coming up with, speaking about conspiring against Maduro's government. I'm curious if any of the countries in the region has, let's say, loudly protested this, Brazil included, especially since Venezuela, while not a member of BRICS, it was close to being one, or it really seemed like it was close to becoming one.
President Lula, in his discourse yesterday, he mentioned Venezuela, and he mentioned that the American Navy is active in the Caribbean, and it's not a good sign because they're trying to basically do is a regime change in Venezuela by creating this threat. So he mentioned it, and I think nobody in the region wants a war. There has not been a war in South America for a very long time, and especially by a foreign power which is far away from here. So they will find support maybe from Javier Milei of Argentina, but he's also in trouble now, very, very deep trouble. There's a corruption scandal rocking his government. There was an election in Buenos Aires just a couple of days ago, and he lost it very, very badly. So his government is now very fragile. Uh,
Mhm.
and I don't think any country in this region, especially Brazil, yeah, Brazil has complicated relations with Maduro government in Venezuela, but that doesn't mean they're going to just stand by and watch an attack on Venezuela, which is not going to happen. This is all
Right.
posturing. They blew up
Oh, you don't think
a
so? You think they're bluffing?
they're bluffing for sure. They're bluffing. I mean, it's a show of his strength.
Mhm.
Muscle flexing and saying this is our backyard. We can do what they want. I mean, they blew up a boat, and claimed the drug dealers were killed. We don't know who are these people who were killed, right? There's no way to prove it. And Venezuela is not a, Venezuela is a has a good military. They're quite capable of defending themselves. You know, they have F-16s, they have Sukhois, they have S-300 missiles. So I think if there's a war, I think the American fleet is going to suffer big damage, and I don't think American president can afford to suffer huge damage. Just in your backyard. So yeah, it's all 50 million reward on Maduro, information Maduro. He's the president of Venezuela. He's in public all the time. Why do you need 50 million reward on information about him? Is hard to understand. Of course, it's an attempt to create uncertainty,
Yeah.
destabilize the country, you know, and expect the people to come out on the street or uh, like create some kind of anarchy and chaos, like what's seeing in Nepal, a small country. All of a sudden, the country is burning. It's a so and because they control social media, the big tech is with them, and they can use big tech to create unrest in the country. But a military invasion of Venezuela, in my opinion, given the circumstances, given the history, and is out of question. Very difficult.
Hmm. You brought up Nepal. Um, from my understanding, Nepal passed laws against the social media companies because the social media companies weren't adhering to Nepali law. Am I understanding that right?
I think what the Nepali government wanted, they wanted these social media companies to register locally, which is a global practice. If Facebook operates in Brazil or India, they have to create a local office, and they
Of
have
course.
to adhere by the local laws.
Right.
But so they made this law, and they asked these countries to do that, and they refused. They said, "Oh, Nepal is a small country, so they don't really care." But and if you don't follow local law, the government has a right to remove you. So that's what happened in Nepal. But the reaction and how the people have reacted is something really, really concerning. No, people have a right to protest, but burning down Parliament building, burning down the House of Prime Minister, we have seen in this in too many places in recent years, especially in South Asia. It happened in Sri Lanka, then it happened in Bangladesh, it had happened in another form in Pakistan, and now Nepal. Also, we've seen this happening in Indonesia. A local assembly was burned, and the young people who are kind of use a lot social media, Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp principally. So I think you can use social media to create unrest in a country, especially why these things only happen in developing countries and emerging countries. This kind of burning down, these things don't happen
Yeah.
in other parts of the world. Thing
Well,
they've
I'm
tried many
here
times.
in
Iran,
Indonesia. I've watched it
Iran-
take place.
yeah,
Shocked by the whole thing because it was going from place to place to place. And I guess the question becomes, do you think this stuff is quote unquote organic, or do you think it's astroturf? I mean, it's a hell of a thing for people to come out and burn down a parliament building. That's a pretty major organization feat, right?
yeah.
Especially
You
over
know,
something like the social media thing. It just seems over the top. And it
yeah,
seems like a color revolution tactic as opposed
yeah.
to just this organic upswell of people who all of a sudden we're angry and we're going to burn down parliament and burn down people's houses. Just seems outrageous.
Yeah, and it happens so quickly, South Asia has a tradition of a lot of protests, but sit-in protest. You go to parliament, you sit in front of parliament, or go in front of the residence of a leader and sit there and protest, what's called peaceful protest. But now, in a matter of 24 hours, people gather on the streets, and then they, all hell break loose. You're burning down government buildings. So it's more like not an attack on the government. It's an attack on the state itself, because the parliament doesn't belong to a government. It's a state institutions,
Oh, good point.
So we saw that in Sri Lanka. I mean, government is, corrupt government, inefficient government. Those are other matters, and people have a right to protest. It was burning down presidential palace, looting presidential palace. We saw what happened in Bangladesh, and the prime minister she was almost killed. I mean, so this cannot be organic, I mean, and at such a, it's like there's a fuse which is lit, and then there's a sudden explosion, and everything goes down the drain. And invariably they get a government which is pro-US, and it works in interest, not in the interest of their own people, but in interest of other international interests. I mean, Bangladesh, the Muhammad Yunus has been running a government, unelected government, for more than a year, and there's no signal that he's going to go for elections, and he's banning the political party which founded Bangladesh.
Amazing how that happens. Amazing how coincidental that is, right? It's like, whoa, just such a coincidence.
Yeah, so it's that's the world we live in,
Yeah. God, man, Brian Beletic is so right about this. You got to control your information space. Like, it's one thing to have tanks, to have bullets, to have military. You can have all that stuff. If you lose your political space because the population is listening to Facebook and Twitter and US propaganda coming out of YouTube, you're screwed. Like, unless you're going to turn that military on your own population, which in and of itself is a problem, you got to control your information space. It's such a big deal. And what's wild about it is that seems to be what Nepal was trying to do before all of this accelerate effectively took place. So, Shobhan, man, you are fantastic. You have my thanks for coming on and having this conversation with me, especially at the last minute. Shobhan Saxena. He is an Indian journalist based out of Sao Paulo, Brazil, with a career spanning more than 30 years. He has reported for the Times of India, The Hindu, The Indian Express, various other publications in India. Right now, he is international correspondent for DD India, the international channel for India's public broadcaster. You be safe. Enjoy the rest of your day, okay?
Thank you. Thanks. It's a pleasure.
Have a good one, man. Thank you. All right. Shobhan is fantastic. Always appreciate him joining.